You're listening to Audiology. Support our work on Patreon and be sure to submit your requests for topics in the comments below. When Jamestown was founded in 1607, the local indigenous tribes were open to trading food with the colonists in exchange for metal tools. However, by 1609, the relationship had soured. The governor of the colony of Virginia, John Smith, began to send out raiding parties to forcefully take provisions from the indigenous settlements. These raids involved burning down settlements that resisted and stealing food, which led to a deep-seated resentment towards the colonists and eventually sparked conflict. These actions drove a wedge between the colonists and the indigenous tribes, culminating in a siege of the Jamestown fort that lasted for several months. Cut off from supplies, many of the Jamestown colonists died of starvation during the dreadful starving time of 1609 to 1610. The London Company, which was in charge of the colony, prioritized its survival. They realized that to keep the colony alive, the colonists needed to keep the peace with the Powhatan people. Once a truce was reached, both sides saw the benefits of trade again. The chief of the Powhatan specifically requested metal hatchets and copper in exchange for food. Unlike John Smith, later leaders like Thomas Dale and Thomas Gates, who had military backgrounds, saw the relationship with the Powhatan Confederacy in terms of military strategy. The Powhatan people ultimately saw the English settlers not as traders, but as invaders intent on taking over their land. Chief Powhatan expressed this sentiment clearly, saying, "Your coming is not for trade, but to invade my people and possess my country. Having seen the death of all my people thrice, I know the difference of peace and war better than any in my country." If I fought the English, he predicted, I would be so harassed by Smith that I can neither rest, eat, nor sleep, but my tired men must watch. And if a twig breaks, everyone cries, "There comes Captain John Smith." Then we must flee without knowing where, leading to a fearful and miserable end to our lives. This quote underscores the deep tensions and misunderstandings between the two groups, setting the stage for the complex and often tragic interaction that followed. In 1610, when the London Company tasked the new colonial governor Gates with Christianizing the natives and incorporating them into the colony, they specifically mentioned that Chief Powhatan should at least become a tributary and acknowledge no other lord but King James. Upon reaching Jamestown and finding the government's plan unrealistic, Gates planned to evacuate. However, as he and the colonists were sailing away, they encountered Thomas West, 3rd Baron de la Warr, who was arriving with his fleet. De la Warr took command and decided to stay, aiming to conquer the local tribes. By July 1610, West dispatched Gates to deal with the Kecoughtan people. Gates devised a plan to draw them out with a music and dance act by his drummer, only to then attack them, a brutal act marking the start of the First Anglo-Powhatan War. In an attempt to force peace, the colonists, led by Samuel Argall, kidnapped Pocahontas, Chief Powhatan's daughter, demanding in exchange for her release the freedom of all Powhatan captives, the return of seized English weapons, and an agreement to peace. During her captivity, Pocahontas was introduced to the English language, customs, and the Anglican religion. She converted to Christianity, adopting the name Rebecca. John Rolfe, whom she met while held, saw their marriage as a way to ensure lasting peace between the English and Powhatan peoples, not out of mere affection, but for the greater good and divine glory. Their marriage indeed ushered in a period of relative peace. Edward Waterhouse, secretary of the Virginia Company, observed how this peace led to a notable reduction in hostilities, with settlers dispersing to cultivate rich grounds without fear, rarely needing to arm themselves except for hunting. English homes were open to the natives, who were treated as guests and often shared lodgings with the English, symbolizing a notable though temporary harmonization of relations between the two peoples. After Powhatan passed away in the year 1618, his brother Opechancanough took over as the paramount chief of their confederacy. Opechancanough, described as a disabled and reserved elderly man, assumed this role. However, it was their youngest brother, Opechancanough, who likely took on the leadership reins, with help from his close friend and war chief advisor Namatanui. Both of these younger figures doubted that peace with the English colonists could last. Sometime around the year 1620 or 1621, Opechancanough either stepped down or was removed from his position, though it's possible he didn't pass away until the year 1630. After this change, Opechancanough, with his younger brother now in charge along with Namatanui, started plotting for a conflict they saw as inevitable. Bouncing back from a loss they faced leading Pamunkey warriors in the First Anglo-Powhatan War, they aimed to surprise the English with a fierce attack. Their goal was to restrict the colonists to a mere trading post, preventing further expansion and settlement. In the spring of 1622, the strategy turned into action. Triggered by the killing of his advisor, Namatanui, by a settler, Opechancanough coordinated surprise assaults on over 31 English settlements and plantations. These were strategically placed primarily along the James River, reaching as far as Henricus. The aim was clear: to halt English expansion and assert their resistance. In Jamestown, an Indian youth who was staying with one of the colonists, Richard Pace, played a crucial role in saving the settlement. This young person woke up Pace in the middle of the night to alert him about an imminent attack. Since Pace lived across the river from Jamestown, he quickly made sure his family was safe, then rode over to Jamestown to warn the rest of the colony. Thanks to this warning, Jamestown was able to strengthen its defenses in time. The identity of this Indian youth who warned Pace remains unknown in historical records. Although some stories have referred to him as Chanco, this might not be accurate. In a letter dated April 4, 1623, from the Virginia Council to the Virginia Company of London, an Indian named Chauco is mentioned. However, Chauco is described not as a youth, but as someone who had spent a lot of time with the English. He reportedly revealed the plot of an attack on the day of a massacre, saving many lives. Additionally, Chauco could be the same person as Chacro, mentioned in a court record from October 25, 1624, as an Indian who lived with Lieutenant Sharp, Captain William Powell, and Captain William Pierce during the time Sir Thomas Dale governed, which was before 1616. It's possible that over time, people have mixed up the story of the older Indian, Chauco, with that of the younger individual who alerted Richard Pace. In a surprising one-day attack, the Powhatan tribes launched assaults on many smaller communities, including the area of Henricus and its innovative college designed for both native and settler children. In the area known as Martin's Hundred, the attack was particularly devastating, with 73 individuals losing their lives. Over in Wolstenholme town, the impact was even more severe, with more than half of its residents killed, leaving the town nearly obliterated except for 2 houses and part of a church that remained standing. Overall, the Powhatan were responsible for the deaths of about 400 colonists, which accounted for a third of the white population at the time, and they also took 20 women as captives. These women were integrated into the Powhatan community, living and working among them until either they passed away or were eventually ransomed back. Following these attacks, the settlers were forced to vacate several areas, including the Falling Creek Ironworks, Henricus, and Smith's Hundred. After surviving an attack, the English colonists made a decision. They agreed unanimously to consolidate into fewer settlements for better safety. Their initial plan was to gather forces for a counterattack, but they faced a challenge. The majority of the survivors were unable to fight, being mostly women, children, and men unfit for battle. Opechancanough, the leader of the attacking warriors, expected the English to either leave or respect the Powhatan's power after their defeat, as was common among Native American tribes. He even told the Patawomeck tribe, who had remained neutral, that he anticipated the English would disappear from their lands within 2 months. This was a gross misjudgment of the English settlers and their overseas supporters. In May 16, 23, negotiations for peace were initiated with Opechancanough, starting with the release of Mistress Boyce as a sign of goodwill. On May 22nd, during a meeting with Opechancanough and Powhatan villagers, Dr. John Potts had prepared poisoned wine, which led to the death of 200 Powhatans after ceremonial toasts, and another 50 were killed afterwards. Opechancanough managed to escape, but the incident resulted in the killing of several tribal leaders. From May to November, the colonists launched raids on Powhatan settlements, greatly benefiting from the destruction of their corn crops, which brought the Powhatan society close to collapse and proved highly profitable for the colonists in Jamestown. Back in England, following the 1622 massacre, John Smith planned to return to Virginia with a force to protect the colony and potentially displace the Powhatans. He envisioned establishing a running army for constant defense. However, Smith's plan to return never materialized. The colonists justified their aggressive actions and land seizures over the next 10 years by citing the 1622 massacre, which had nearly destroyed Jamestown and killed 347 settlers. Historian Betty Wood explains that the attack led the survivors to believe that the Powhatans had lost any legal or moral claim to their lands. The response of the colonists included forceful retaliation, surprise attacks, causing famine, destroying Powhatan resources, and exploiting divisions among tribes to weaken them further. This comprehensive strategy of aggression was aimed at claiming Powhatan lands and securing them for the colonists' use and benefit. Back in 1624, King James I made a big change in Virginia, turning it into a crown colony. This meant that the king and his government took over control instead of leaving it to the London Company. They started using their power to reward their favorites. Meanwhile, settlers kept moving onto land that belonged to the Powhatan tribes, often ignoring or changing any agreements made with the tribes if it did not suit the colony's needs anymore. Understandably, this made the Powhatan tribes pretty upset. The tension escalated into the Third Anglo-Powhatan War in 1644, which ended with around 500 colonists killed. Although this number was similar to a previous conflict in 1622 by then, the colony had grown so much that the loss was less significant, affecting less than 10% of the population. During this war, Opechancanough, the elderly leader of the Powhatan, was captured and later killed by a guard while imprisoned in Jamestown. His death was a turning point, leading to a rapid decline of the powerful Powhatan Confederacy. Eventually, the tribes either left the area, integrated with the colonists, or lived on one of the few reservations set up in Virginia, although these were often encroached upon by expanding European settlements. Today, the state of Virginia officially recognizes 7 tribes from the original Powhatan Confederacy. 2 of them, the Pamunkey and Mattapony, still have their 17th century reservations, located between the rivers bearing their names in King William County. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more content.